Chapter 39-35. When Yuan's face was extremely red, but she couldn't do anything about it. He kept teasing her, letting her taste it. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and bit his finger lightly. Yimubai's eyes darkened. He retracted his hand and held her face with both hands, kissing her. He had never been so patient before. It was as if he had a lifetime to do this. When Yuan trembled and buried her face into the pillow, he chased after her and kissed the soft flesh behind her ear. He kissed her again and again until her whole body went limp. At the peak of their passion, when Yuan looked up and tugged at his black hair, begging him to stop. "Be good." He comforted her, but it was torturous. For the entire night, he had been very gentle to her. But for Wen Yuan, she even wished that he would be rougher this night because he was too torturous. Due to the excessive indulgence, she still slept through the next morning. When Wen Yuan woke up, it was already 10 o'clock. Yimubai was still there. When she opened her eyes, she saw his handsome face. Then, she was kissed by him and even made out twice. When it was over, Wen Yuan lay in his arms. She had no energy left in her body, but he still seemed to be restless. She said weakly, "I don't have any energy left even if you want to." She didn't want to get up. It was probably because the feeling last night was good, so she didn't reject him today. After they were done, she still lay on his body, feeling lazy and comfortable. Yimubai's hand was on her back. He paused for a moment. "I'll carry you to soak for a while." She didn't want to, and he didn't want to either. But he knew that he was a little rough just now. He was afraid that he would hurt her, so he wanted to carry her to soak for a while. After he said that, Wen Yuan grunted. "Carry me." Yimubai smiled. He got up and carried her to the bathroom. 5 minutes later, Wen Yuan was comfortably soaking in the hot water. She was still lying in his arms. She was half asleep as he massaged her sore muscles. "Yimubai, where did you get those six-pack abs? You don't even work out." She laid on her stomach and looked at him like a little girl. Her hands were still in a mess. He laughed softly and let her do as she pleased. Then, when she cried out in surprise and tried to pull her hand away, he held it. His voice was hoarse. "The seventh piece," Wen Yuan bit his lip. "Let go of my hand. You were the one who touched me first, Wen Yuan. How can you do that?" He whispered into her ear. His voice was hoarse. "Settle it." Wen Yuan's face was as red as a tomato. She refused to budge and continued to lie in his arms. "Wen Yuan, you were the one who provoked me first." He bit down hard on her neck, causing her to cry out in pain. After that, he did it carelessly and hastily. Wen Yuan didn't want to soak anymore, so he carried her to the shower. In the end, he still pushed her against the bathroom wall. Wen Yuan was really exhausted and slept all the way until 1 in the afternoon. When she woke up, Yimubai was still there. He was wearing a white bathrobe and sitting on the sofa reading documents. There was a stack of documents on the other side. Secretary, he must have been there. When Yuan sat up and scratched her hair. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. Yimubai looked up and saw her. He smiled faintly and said lazily, "Don't worry. I won't let anyone see you like this, be it a man or a woman." As he said that, he put the documents aside and walked towards her. He leaned over and kissed her. "I'll get someone to send you something to eat. Are you hungry?" End of chapter. Chapter 39-36. She said a little embarrassedly, "You haven't eaten yet." Yimubai didn't answer her at first. His fingers touched her face gently, and after a while, he said hoarsely, "I'm very full. Very satisfied." Wen Yuan got up and dialed the internal line. As he looked at Wen Yuan, he mouthed for her to get dressed. Then, he smiled when he saw her blushing face. After ordering a meal with the customer service, he hung up. It'll be here in 20 minutes. Wash up first. Wen Yuan put on a bathrobe and went to the bathroom. Looking at herself in the mirror, she couldn't recognize herself. Her face was red, her hair was messy, and her eyes were misty. To put it nicely, she was lazy and sexy. To put it bluntly, she was overindulgent. She stared blankly for a long time before she tied up her hair, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. After tidying herself up, she walked out. Just then, the male waiter who delivered the food came over. Yimubai said in a low voice, "Go inside." Wen Yuan looked at her bare feet and her overly low neckline. She let out an "ah" and went back to the master bedroom, only coming out after a while. He still seemed a little unhappy. Sitting at the dining table, he scrutinized her as if he wanted to burn 2 holes in her. Wen Yuan tugged at her clothes and said softly, "It's not my own clothes." He was still glaring at her, but after a while, he calmed down and said mildly, "Sit down and eat." Wen Yuan sat down. He looked at her clean face, which was indescribably comfortable. His heart skipped a beat, and he said softly, "Come here." Wen Yuan looked up. "I want to eat." He was still looking at her. "Come here." Wen Yuan still went over. As soon as she went over, he pulled her onto his lap and said, "Sit here and eat." His sudden kiss made Wen Yuan a little uncomfortable. Moreover, it was a little unbearable between 2 thin layers of clothing. She bit her lip and said very softly, "I want to come down." He had already started to feed her. Wen Yuan refused to be fed. "I'm not a little girl," Yimubai looked at her. "You want me to feed a little girl?" He smiled. "It can only be Yi Hui." Wen Yuan looked down. "I'll eat myself." He fed her persistently, "Eat, or be eaten. You choose." She stared at him. She really couldn't stand him anymore. "Yimubai. Can you not be so shameless?" He just stared at her and laughed. "What do you think?" Wen Yuan gave in and was fed by him mouthful by mouthful. After eating, she said in a low voice, "Yimubai, just once." He looked at her, his voice low and chuckling. "I only have one chance, As he spoke, he was about to tell her that he had done it many times and could do it many more times in the future. Wen Yuan's gaze was indescribable. Yimubai's voice was hoarse. "I've taken the medicine." Her gaze was even more indescribable. He smiled and nibbled the tip of her nose. "You took it for real." "You're so stupid." Wen Yuan covered his nose and glared at him. He smiled and kissed her again. "All right, go take a rest. I'll go to the office after I'm done eating. Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't leave immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on the back of his chair. Yimubai enjoyed the feeling of being kissed. He chuckled. "What's the matter?" Wen Yuan hugged his shoulders from behind. "Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Yimubai's body stiffened. After a long time, he turned to look at her. "Wen Yuan, you're acting coquettishly." End of chapter. Chapter 39-37. She didn't say anything. She just hugged his shoulder and gently rested her face on his shoulder. After a long time, she whispered, "I don't have any clothes to wear. My gown was torn by you last night. He was so gentle last night." She didn't understand why the gown was torn. Yimubai didn't ask anymore. He just quietly finished his meal and turned around to lead her to the master bedroom. He threw her on the soft bed again. He didn't do anything but kiss her. He kissed her everywhere. Then he pressed against her ear. Wen Yuan, I don't need to take medicine when you are like this, she trembled. He slowly moved over and nibbled on the tip of her nose. I'll take you to the company. Let's come back tonight, there was a child at home. He couldn't be too indulgent. Wen Yuan buried her face in the pillow and said in a very low voice, Yi Hui in Xiangnan, Yi Hui was sent to my mother's place. Xiangnan is grown up. There are chauffeurs and aunties to take care of him. What are you worried about? Men and women were different. Although the love jade was like poison, Wen Yuan wouldn't be like him. She was still worried about the child at home. She wrapped her slender arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. She said in a low voice, let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home. Yi Mubai was stunned. He realized what she meant and his heart softened. He lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. Let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home. Wen Yuan still wanted to say something, but he had already gotten up. He took 2 sets of clothes from the changing room. They were sent by Secretary He. He gave them to Wen Yuan. Put them on. There is an important meeting in the afternoon. Otherwise, he would have chosen to spend the whole day here. Wen Yuan changed into the clothes he had prepared for her. It was a beige floral dress. It was very elegant. She tied her hair into a bun. She looked fresh and clean. She didn't put on any makeup and went out with him. Unexpectedly, the entrance of the hotel was surrounded by reporters. There were 30 to 40 of them asking questions. CEO Yi, I heard that you and Mrs. Yi left the banquet early. Are you going to have some alone time? CEO Yi, Mrs. Yi was immediately removed from the hot search list. It was your doing, right? CEO Yi, you seem to love Mrs. Yi very much. Are you willing to give us an exclusive interview? Yi Mubai's face was cold the whole time. He carried Wen Yuan in his arms and walked directly to the parking lot. His Mulsan was parked there, and he opened the door to let Wen Yuan get in. He turned around, got in the car, and fastened his seatbelt. He didn't even care about the group of reporters. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, turned his head to look at him and asked softly, I'm trending. Yi Mubai buckled his seatbelt and looked at her. I'll give you a gift later. She gasped and looked at him. Yi Mubai smiled faintly. You'll like it. Wen Yuan looked at him with a curious expression. He started the car and drove towards the Starlight building. It wasn't far, and it only took him about 20 minutes to get there. He unbuckled his seatbelt and let her out of the car and into the building. From the moment he walked into the building, he was very busy. In the lobby, he met a few middle and high-ranking officials and gave them a few instructions. When he arrived at the office on the top floor, he only sat for a while before going to the meeting. Wen Yuan stayed in his lounge to catch up on sleep. When she woke up, he was back. However, he was in the office having a team meeting with 2 executive vice presidents. Wen Yuan lay on the bed in the lounge and thought to herself, where did he get the energy from? He clearly did it so many times in one day and one night, or did he really take his medicine? End of chapter. Chapter 39-38. As she thought about it, her face heated up, and she didn't dare to think further. About half an hour later, he finally had time to relax. He walked into the lounge and saw that Wen Yuan was awake. He bent down and bit her face. How long have you been awake? Half an hour. She turned her body sideways, her expression relaxed and soft. He really wanted to have her once here, but thinking that she might not be able to take it, he gave up and changed it to a light kiss. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low voice, I'll show you something. Wen Yuan bit her lower lip. What? He pulled her up, helped her tidy her hair, and pulled her out. In his office, Wen Yuan saw a huge photo and a few smaller photo frames. It was her playing the piano last night and playing the piano with him. And on his desk, there was a single photo of her sitting alone on the sofa and looking out at the night sky. The side profile was very beautiful. "Do you like it?" He smiled. "The photo of us playing the piano together can be hung in the bedroom as a wedding photo. I want to put this big one in the living room. It matches the decoration. As for the other photos, some could be placed in his study, and some could be placed in her private changing room." Wen Yuan looked at them and then looked at him. "These are the photos that are trending." He smiled. "Yes, but I don't want to share you with others. So I removed it." Wen Yuan didn't like to be in the limelight, but she liked these photos very much. She agreed and asked him when she could hang it at home. "Now." Yimubai smiled and walked over to call the internal line to ask Secretary He to get someone to do it. In a while, a few people came in to send the things to the villa. When they returned, it had been hung up according to his request. Their bedroom finally looked like a married couple's place. Wen Yuan looked at the photo frame on the bedside table. She liked it very much. She looked at it for a long time. Yimubai hugged her from behind. "Do you like it?" "Yes." She turned her head and smiled. "Why did you do this all of a sudden?" He whispered into her ear, "Because you look like a little wife now. Last night's reward." Wen Yuan was furious. He turned around and glared at him. "Yimubai, you're too despicable. Damn it, you were so happy last night, and you kept biting me, huh?" He hugged her waist, kissed her, and whispered against her face. She had never been able to handle him like this. Wen Yuan bit his lips. "Yimubai." Yimubai chuckled. "Scared?" With that said, he turned her around and nibbled on the tip of her nose. "I'll let you go tonight." She was speechless for a moment. "Is it fun for Yimubai to play tricks on me?" He pressed his forehead against hers. "Mrs. Yi, you want me not to let you go, eh?" "No." She snorted softly and then whispered, "Yimubai, we." His voice was as gentle as the night. "I know. I'll take it slow." He knew what she was worried about. What they were touching now was not only flesh and blood, but also souls. Wen Yuan was a little afraid. He comforted her, saying that it didn't matter, that he could wait. He kissed her, carried her to the desk in the study, and gave it to her gently, just to please her, not for his own sake. He said that he could wait for her to love him slowly. At this moment, she really felt the gentleness that belonged to Yimubai. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a bosom friend, recommending the urban guru Shirshinshu. Chapter 39-39. That night, he didn't do anything to her. After settling Xiangnan down, he took her to the study and gave her a book to read while he dealt with his work. He said that he had been putting in a lot of effort for her recently and that he had neglected his work. With that, he planted a kiss on her forehead. Wen Yuan looked at him. "You can do it twice less." His eyes were full of smiles as he looked at her and chuckled. "Wen Yuan, you're obviously not saying what you mean. Am I making you uncomfortable?" She looked up helplessly. He smiled and pinched her cheek. "All right, stop fooling around. I'll accompany you after I'm done." "I don't need you to accompany me." Wen Yuan licked his lips and said bitterly. He looked at her and suddenly leaned over. She thought that he was going to do something to her, so she closed her eyes and let out a small scream. However, what she expected didn't happen. He only nibbled on the tip of her nose and chuckled. "Wen Yuan, you're so cute." When Yuan, she blushed a little. He stepped back and the expensive fabric of his clothes made a slight sound. She then opened her eyes and looked at him. His eyes were still smiling as he stared at her. After a long time, he reached out and pinched her cheek. Silly. When Yuan could only pretend to read because it was too embarrassing. Yimubai walked over and wanted to light a cigarette. However, he gave up when he saw Wen Yuan and said to her instead, Wen Yuan, help me make a cup of coffee. Wen Yuan put down the book and stared at him for a while before getting up to make the coffee for him. Yimubai was a man who liked to enjoy himself. In this aspect, he was somewhat similar to Qin Chen, just not as exaggerated. He had a very good coffee machine. When Yuan hadn't used it much and only made a cup of coffee for him after half an hour. She took a sip and felt that it was too bitter, so she added cream and sugar. When she brought it to him, he took a sniff. Then he looked at Wen Yuan in surprise. Unexpectedly, it tasted terrible. She actually added cream to his drink. And sugar. However, he still drank half a cup. Wen Yuan coughed lightly. It tastes good, doesn't it? He looked at her, then reached out and pulled her into his arms. Her body fell onto his lap, and he kissed her. Their lips intertwined, and she tasted the coffee she had brewed. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low and husky voice, "How does it taste?" Wen Yuan bit her lip, and then she couldn't help but lick her lower lip, like a kitten licking paste. He kissed her again, and she couldn't help herself. When Yuan sat on his lap, her hands clutching his shirt, and she was as helpless as a young girl. After a long kiss, her face was intoxicated, and her eyes were misty. Yimubai chuckled. Wen Yuan, you really give me a sense of accomplishment. With that said, he placed her in his arms. With one arm hugging her, he flipped through the documents with the other. From time to time, he would stroke her as if he was petting a kitten. When Wen Yuan moved uncomfortably, he would say in a low voice, "If you move again, shall we go back to the room? Why don't we do it here?" Wen Yuan didn't dare to move. After some time, her legs were sore, and she couldn't help but say, "Yimubai, aren't you tired?" "I'm tired." He smiled. "I've exhausted myself, Wen Yuan." She couldn't help but say, "That's not what I'm talking about." "But that's what I wanted to say." He chuckled, then closed the documents. "I'm not reading anymore." She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for a confidant. Chapter 39-40. He carried her back to the bedroom. When Yuan's voice was a little stammering, "Why? I'm not as pretty as you." He whispered against her lips while holding her. After a few steps, he went back to the bedroom. He put her on the bed, leaned over and kissed her. His fingers went through her hair and kissed her gently. When Yuan was moved but she resisted. She was afraid that he would do it again. She put her hands on his shoulders and said in a low voice, "Aren't you exhausted?" He buried his face in her neck and chuckled, "I didn't say I would do it." When Yuan turned her face away, "Why do you always hug and kiss me if you don't want to do it?" He held her face and chased after her to kiss her. "Do you miss me, Wen Yuan?" "No." She turned her face away embarrassedly. Her face was very hot. Yimubai chuckled, "Let me check." He moved his hands up and down while saying that. He sighed, "What if Mrs. Yi needs it and Mr. Yi is exhausted again?" She was so amused by him that she didn't know what to do. She reached out to hug him and held his hand with her other hand to stop him from doing evil again. Yimubai just let her hold his hand tightly. After a long time, he got close to her ear and said in a low voice, "Mrs. Yi, it's bad. Mr. Yi wants it now. Wen Yuan hugged him tightly and said in a trembling voice, "Yimubai." She felt very ashamed, but she still got close to his ear and whispered, "I'm still in pain." He turned her face and said in a hoarse voice, "Let me see." She didn't want to, but he still pressed her head down. When he looked up again, his eyes were a little deep. Then he kissed her again for a long time. Then he went to get the medicine for the wound and carefully applied it on Wen Yuan. She kept lying with her face buried in the pillow and her fingers clutched the bed sheet. Yimubai smiled. "Wen Yuan, you look like it's your first time." She looked at him with misty eyes, and so did he. Then he leaned over and kissed her again. He didn't know how many times and how long he had kissed her that night. It was like a night. Then, he gently whispered in her ear, "Wen Yuan, I think I've really fallen in love with you." She was bewildered, and he placed her hand over his heart. His heart was beating very fast, perhaps it was because they were moved, but their relationship improved. Although Wen Yuan stayed at home like before, Yimubai would find time to accompany her to watch concerts and go shopping. Wen Yuan did not lack anything, so she would bring him to some antique shops to look at some ornaments. Occasionally, she would buy some. She had a good eye, so she would always be able to buy some very artistic things. Yimubai liked to accompany her, even more than he paid attention to Xiangnan and Yi Hui. In the beginning, he came home very early. He would pick up Xiangnan and guide Xiangnan in his homework. Then, he would bathe Yi Hui and play games. He became a good husband and father. However, when Yuan needed to repay his efforts at night, he often trapped her under his body and teased her until she blushed and her heart raced. He was only willing to give it to her when she begged him. In the end, he would even say that she had overused him. It was obvious that he liked women, but he still forced her to admit that it was what she wanted. He was too despicable. However, such feelings that were soaked in love and desire were like a dose of poison. Wen Yuan couldn't refuse it. She started to be different from before. The clothes in her wardrobe started to be bright and lively, unlike before, which was always in line with the norm. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a bosom friend. Chapter 39-41. She even began to like wearing jeans and sweaters, or black casual pants and shirts, because he always took her out. Wen Yuan wanted to cut her hair shorter, but he didn't allow it. Wen Yuan felt strange. It's more convenient to cut it shorter. At that time, Yimubai was reading documents and seemed to be absent-minded. She asked again, and he put down the documents and looked at her. "Because, when you lie on the bed without clothes, your long hair is very tempting." Wen Yuan said, "Yimubai, pretend that I didn't ask this question." When she ran away, he laughed and then pulled her back to kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he picked her up and put her on the bed. He peeled her as clean as an egg, lifted her hair, and said in a low voice, "Just like this." When Yuan said, "Yimubai, you're overindulging me. That's also Mrs. Ye's fault." He whispered sexily, "When Yuan, you don't know how beautiful your body is." Sometimes she would also take Yi Hui to his company. She and Yi Hui would sit on the sofa. Yi Hui would play with toys while she would read a book. Yimubai had a lot of meetings, so he would play with Yi Hui in the office for a while. Yi Hui fell asleep. When Yuan covered her with the quilt and said in a low voice, "I'd better not bring Yi Hui here in the future." After saying that, she looked up and was kissed by him. After a long time, Yimubai sucked her lips and said in a low voice, "I want to see you." He looked at Yi Hui, then carried Wen Yuan out and put her on the sofa in the office. He kissed her. "Wait a minute." She watched him get up and walk to the desk. She pressed the internal line. Secretary, I won't receive anyone today. Secretary, he was stunned for a moment and then understood. CEO, had something to do. She shook her head and smiled gently. CEO had entered the honeymoon period. In the office, Yimubai walked back slowly and sat next to Wen Yuan. His fingers gently stroked her face. Here or on the desk. Wen Yuan buried her face in his lower abdomen and hugged his waist. No. I miss Wen Yuan. He lowered his head and kissed her. He also knew that he had been a little too indulgent recently. For more than a month, other than her period, he had dominated her several times almost every night. Sometimes, when it was raging, he didn't know where he got the energy from. It was as if he didn't know fatigue or tiredness and just wanted to possess her. At this moment, looking at the faint blue color under her eyes, his heart softened. He gently put down the palm that was originally caressing her and faintly smiled, "I'll let you go." When Yuan made an "oh" sound and obediently rested his face on the side of his legs, his arms still hugging him. He laughed again. Acting spoiled again. When Yuan, you're already in your 30s. Not as young as the girls in your company, right? She said softly, her fingers gently tracing his heart. In fact, compared to a love, she preferred this kind of embrace. After Wen Yuan said that, he laughed. I don't even know what they look like. How do you work? She bit her lip. Yimubai, if one day you really have an affair with an artist in the company, he sat up a little straighter. Then what? Wen Yuan thought for a long time before he came up with a word. I'll just ignore you. He stared at her for a long time and couldn't help laughing. Wen Yuan, I thought you could say something powerful, such as asking me to freeze her and never cooperate with her again. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 39-42. I won't. I'll get a divorce, she added faintly and looked at him. Yimubai was stunned. He held her face and said word by word, I won't give you this chance. It better be like this. She propped herself up. Otherwise, I'll cut you up myself. He stared at her and smiled. Then, he grabbed her hand and pulled it over. You're going to cut me up, HM. Is it here? Wen Yuan was very embarrassed when he pulled her over. She simply lay in his arms. Yimubai, don't be so shameless, he chuckled. Am I shameless or are you shameless? HM. You want to cut me up? Wen Yuan, have you eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's gall? With that, he pressed her little hand and put his thin lips next to her ear. Help me get it out, HM. Wen Yuan bit her lip. Yimubai, you're simply lustful and crazy at the same time. He chuckled. Then, do you like lustful and crazy? Wen Yuan sat in his arms. Her face was a little red and her eyes were watery. He stopped joking around. His deep eyes locked onto her and his voice was very low. Wen Yuan. Her long hair was scattered on her shoulders. She looked like she had been abused. She knelt in his arms and was a little helpless. She wanted to break free, but he wouldn't let her. Wen Yuan bit her lip. I don't know. He leaned over and whispered into her soft ear. You like me, Wen Yuan. You like how I treat you. You also like how I do things to you. You hug me every time. How dare you say you don't like me? She buried her face in his shoulder. She didn't allow him to say anything else. He laughed like a spring breeze. Then, he kissed her crazily. He pressed her on the sofa and forced her to kiss him. Just when he was about to take off her clothes, the door of the office was pushed open. The person who came in was the one with the plastic surgery face. Her name was Zhang Mang. She was wearing a white dress and barged into Yimubai and Wen Yuan's world. Yimubai was interrupted. His body floated above Wen Yuan, and his face darkened. Get lost. The girl begged, CEO Yi, please don't terminate the contract with me. I can get it back. It wasn't easy for her to get into Stars Entertainment and she didn't want to walk out. Artists who terminated their contracts with Stars Entertainment would become useless, so she ignored the company's rules and barged into CEO Ye's office. She didn't expect there to be a woman in CEO Ye's office. She subconsciously thought that it was an unspoken rule because she didn't see clearly that it was Wen Yuan. Her voice was soft. CEO Yi, I can do it too. Can what? Yimubai sneered. Then, he got up, walked to the office, and pressed the intercom. Secretary He, get security here. Zhang Mang is stunned. She is in a trance. Boss Yi, don't you like this face very much? Wen Yuan sat up and glared at Yimubai. What the fuck? He looked at her helplessly. At this moment, little Yi Hui woke up. She ran out of the lounge and threw herself into Wen Yuan's arms. Mommy. Chapter 39-43. Oh, Wen Yuan replied and walked over. Only Yimubai and the girl named Zhang Meng were left in the office. At this time, the security guards came over. However, Yimubai told them not to take action. He just said calmly, I love my wife very much. I won't do anything unspoken. Also, the termination of the contract is the company's decision. It has nothing to do with personal reasons. I hope you understand. Zhang Mang looked at him with tears in her eyes. I thought the nightclub liked this face. I like my wife. Yimubai smiled slightly and then raised his hand. Miss Zhang, please leave. When Zhang Meng left, she left in tears. After she left, Su Mo came over in a hurry. She must have heard the news just now. She was a little stunned and closed the door after a long time. CEO Yi. Yimubai looked at her. It's a pity. She's very talented. Su Mo was silent for a while and then said in a low voice, she wanted to take the shortcut. In fact, not everyone was like Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan was the one who took the initiative, but Yimubai didn't have a wife. Now that CEO Yi had a wife and a son and a daughter, what was the point of making her look like Lin Cece? After saying that, Su Mo looked at Yimubai. The contract has been terminated. For humanitarian reasons, she didn't pay for the company's losses. Yimubai looked at her. Su Mo smiled bitterly. I paid for her. Otherwise, how could a northerner have the money to pay for the liquidated damages? Moreover, it was a sky-high price. Yimubai glanced at her, walked to the desk and sat down. He said calmly, Su Mo, if you continue to be so generous, you may become very poor. I won't. Su Mo smiled maliciously. Wen Yuan gave me 1% of Starlight Entertainment's shares. After saying that, she smiled at Yimubai. I've long known that Wen Yuan is a spendthrift. After Su Mo left, Yimubai sat there for a while and then laughed. On the way back, Wen Yuan and Yi Hui sat in the back seat. Yimubai was focused on driving and occasionally glanced at Wen Yuan and Yi Hui. Wen Yuan's eyes met hers, and she immediately lowered her head. Together, they went to fetch Xiangnan home. After dinner, the father immediately threw Xiao Yi Hui to Xiangnan. Take care of little sister. Little sister will sleep with you tonight. Xiangnan, Daddy and Mommy are going to do another mysterious mission. Yimubai took Wen Yuan to the study. Unlike before, he pressed her against the door. Do you have anything to say to me? Wen Yuan looked at him and shook his head. No. He pinched her face. It's about squandering, HM. She held back her laughter. I really didn't. Sumo, he gave her another hint, his body leaning forward, hinting that if she didn't tell him, he was going to get serious. When Yuan finally confessed, I gave Sumo 1% of Starlight's shares. He stared at her for a few seconds, then released her and sat down on the sofa. When Yuan leaned against the door and looked at him silently for a while. Then he walked over and half knelt beside him. Are you angry? He turned his head and smiled faintly. No. He reached out and stroked her face. I know that you wanted to thank Sumo and help her. Why didn't you tell me? She didn't say anything. Later, he understood. He sighed and didn't say anything. He just reached out and gently stroked her hair. I know. If there's anything in the future, you can tell me directly, HM. She nodded and put her hand on his shoulder. She leaned her face close to him. You're really not angry anymore. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidants. Chapter 39-44. He glanced at her. His heart was soft, but he didn't show it on his face. What do you think? She coaxed him, which was rare. How can I not be angry? He leaned on the sofa and smiled lazily. Sit here. She blushed. She knew that he wanted to make up for what happened in the office. You don't want to. He looked at her and sighed. Then I'd better be angry. I just don't know if it will affect Sumo. After all, I have a boss who is in a bad mood and dissatisfied with Yucho. When Yuan stared at him, her eyes were full of tears. After hesitating for a long time, she put her hand on his shoulder and moved herself to sit on his lap. But before she sat down, his big palm cushioned her. She sat on his palm. She was wearing a dress, so it was a bit messy. When Yuan's face was very hot. She leaned her face on his shoulder and said in a trembling voice, Xiangnan and Yi Hui are not asleep yet. Xiangnan will take care of his sister. His fingers succeeded, and when Yuan also moaned. She was in a mess because of his teasing. He was still in the mood to chat. Last time you said that Yi Hui should go to the nursery. I thought about it. It seems that what my mother said is also very reasonable. It's better for Yi Hui to receive preschool education in advance. While he was talking, his fingers were not idle. When Yuan gritted her teeth. She couldn't hear it clearly. When she opened her mouth, her voice was like a kitten. What? He looked at her forehead, which was covered with fine sweat, and smiled gently. Yi Hui should go to the nursery, huh? When Yuan was stunned and subconsciously objected. No, he chuckled, tormenting her even more. When Yuan bit his shoulder. Don't. No what? Don't you want Yi Hui to go to school, or don't you want me to do this? He asked in her ear. When Yuan endured it. His eyes were wet, like an innocent deer. She pressed her face against his and said in a broken voice, I don't know. He kept teasing her, forcing her to say all kinds of shameful things. When Yuan was a very traditional-looking woman, and her personality was also very traditional. Every time they did it, her heart would turn red and her heart would race. Yi Mubai found it very interesting. Moreover, after such a long time, he still maintained a strong interest in their relationship. Even he himself was surprised, because according to a certain conclusion, no matter how beautiful a woman was, a man would lose his excitement after sleeping with her for a month. But he was different, he still wanted it every day. After a long time, she softened in his arms and did not get up for a long time. He looked down at her and bit the tip of her nose. Useless thing. When Yuan blushed and reached down to grab his hand, wanting to pull his palm away. However, he chuckled in a low voice. This isn't enough to satisfy you, is it? Her eyes widened. You said you would let me go today. Did I? He smiled faintly. Just now, I think you agreed, for Su Mo, for me, she blushed and looked at him. After a long time, she actually leaned down. Yimubai was surprised. Then, he gently grabbed her hair. When Yuan. She looked up and he murmured, I can't bear to. Perhaps he was like all men in the past and enjoyed it, but now that he loved her so much, he really couldn't bear to. He pulled her up and held her in his arms. He carefully stroked her head. Be good, I don't have to do this. When Yuan buried herself in his arms and said in a soft and hoarse voice, but I like it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 39-45. Yimubai was stunned. After a long time, he murmured in a trembling voice, when Yuan, you said you like it? Her face was slightly red and she was quite shy. Didn't you say that many women like it? His mind was in a mess. What happened after that? Yimubai's mind was in a mess. He almost couldn't think. But in the end, he still pulled her into his arms in time. Later, she gently poked him in his arms. Yimubai. He hummed and looked down at her. He couldn't help but kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he murmured, I feel very good. How about you? When Yuan leaned in his arms and said in a low voice, I'm fine. But, she was a little embarrassed and couldn't say it out loud. But Yimubai knew. For when Yuan, it was very hard. He pressed her down and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. In the end, he couldn't help but hold her in his arms and treat her gently. Late at night, when Yuan was asleep, Yimubai quietly looked at her sleeping face and let out a long sigh. What a prodigal. The next day, he went to the company without Wen Yuan. As soon as he arrived, he called secretary He. Call manager Su over. Secretary He smiled. Is it manager Su Mo? Yimubai looked up. Secretary He smiled again and went to look for him. Su Mo came over in less than 10 minutes and sat opposite Yimubai. What's the matter, CEO Yi? What do you think? He glanced at her and took out a check from the drawer. He put it on the table and slowly pushed it over. Su Mo took a look at it. 200 million. Transfer 1% of your assets to me, Yimubai said lightly. Su Mo smiled. But 1% is more than 200 million. Don't be too greedy. Wen Yuan is a prodigal, but it doesn't mean that I will indulge you. Yimubai said very indifferently, I know you're short on money, but this is enough for you to live a few lifetimes without worrying about food or clothing, as long as you don't have such rotten intentions. He knew that it had not been easy for Su Mo in the past 2 years. Although she looked like a high-class white-collar worker, she had lost all her relatives in the past 2 years. She had opened a homeless home and adopted homeless elderly people and some animals. Other than her own salary, Wen Yuan was also the biggest spendthrift, and he was the biggest spendthrift. Su Mo had never told Wen Yuan about these things. She was smart. Yimubai didn't want Wen Yuan to know about these things. He didn't want Wen Yuan's life to be tainted by these things, so he had been indulging Yi Mo. Su Mo took the check and then threw a document on Yimubai's desk. Her voice was a little low. Only that idiot Wen Yuan didn't realize that you gave her 14 shares. I won't steal someone's love. She paused and said, CEO Yi, you are actually a good person. He had always been a good person, but under the guise of a businessman. Yi Mubai smiled. I used to work hard to advocate for the protection of animals and world peace, but now I realize that being an unscrupulous businessman has changed the world more. Come on. Su Mo exposed him. You just want to be an unscrupulous businessman so that Wen Yuan will worship you. But Wen Yuan still likes artistic youths. You have so much money, but it still can't make up for playing a song with him. These days, Wen Yuan seemed to be possessed. He became enthusiastic towards Yi Mubai again, and there were stars in his eyes. It was probably because of this that Yi Mubai was lit up. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for confidence. Chapter 39-46. Yi Mubai stared at Su Mo for a long time before he snorted. Really? Although he didn't want to admit it, it was the truth. Su Mo smiled. CEO Yi, you know it best, don't you? This time, Yi Mubai only snorted and didn't bother to say a word to her. If it weren't for Wen Yuan, he would have fired this guy right now. Su Mo left Yi Mubai's office and went to the bank to transfer the money. She had a small charity fund that she had been running for more than a year. She was at the end of her rope when she remembered the 1% that Wen Yuan had given her. She was very grateful to Wen Yuan. In the past 2 years, she had cheated Wen Yuan a lot. Wen Yuan had never refused her when she asked for money. Later, when he found out that she was very short of money, he simply gave her 1% and said that she could get a bonus of tens of thousands of yuan every year. Su Mo thought that maybe it was Wen Yuan's purity that made Yi Mubai like him. Wen Yuan was a very romantic person, but he hid it well and lived an ordinary life. However, after getting to know him, she realized that he didn't know anything about daily necessities. She had worked before, but she didn't have any concept of money. 1% of Starlight was worth about 1 billion yuan. She didn't even know that he had given it to her so easily. Su Mo was very envious of such a friend. She was even a little jealous, but she really liked Wen Yuan. 200 million was a great help to her. She transferred the money and was about to leave the bank when she remembered something. She dialed Kong Chiao's number. You haven't received the performance fee from last time. I asked your assistant, and she said it was your idea. Kong Chiao, I know you don't lack money, but business is business, okay? Kong Chiao thought for a moment and smiled. Okay. He met Su Mo in a cafe. When he arrived, Su Mo was already there. He sat opposite her and smiled. How long have you been here? I'm working here. Su Mo pushed a cup of coffee in front of him. Your favorite American coffee, no sugar. He chuckled. While drinking, Su Mo pushed a check in front of him. 5 million yuan, it's settled. Kong Chiao took it and smiled. The two of them drank coffee together and did not talk much. They knew each other because of Wen Yuan. Although they were close, they were not that close. However, he could feel that she liked him. As long as he didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Kong Chiao drank half a cup of coffee and said with a faint smile, I still have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Thank you, Su Mo. He wanted to leave, but Su Mo suddenly reached out and stopped him. Wait a minute. She didn't know why. She suddenly wanted to confess. She didn't want to confess before because she knew how much Kong Chiao loved Wen Yuan. Su Mo held his hand and said in a low voice, just for a while, okay, Kong Chao. He seemed to have sensed something as he lowered his head to look at her hand that was holding his. After a moment of hesitation, he sat down and said, Su Mo, there's something. She knew that he was rejecting her, but she just wanted to say it. Su Mo held the coffee cup and lowered her eyes. Her voice became even lower. I know I'm young and can't meet your standards. Kong Chao sighed, that was my nonsense, I will not use this as a standard. Su Mo looked at him and said slowly, Kong Chao, don't I have the slightest possibility? He stared at her and sighed. Su Mo, there are some stubbornness that even you can't control yourself. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talk about life and find a confidant. Chapter 39-47. His refusal was very tactful, but Su Yao understood. She lowered her eyes and said in a very low voice, I know, Kong Chao. I didn't give up. In fact, I knew the result. Maybe it's because the coffee tastes good today. She smiled at him, and it was a very bright smile. She was a very good girl. Kong Chao knew that, but he didn't feel anything for her. He couldn't say too much sorry because he never needed to apologize if he didn't like her, just like how when Yuan treated him. He wanted to leave, but Su Mo said, she's very good. He paused. She and Yimubai have been very close recently. Yimubai has fallen in love with her. Kong Chao, don't wait for her. Go find a girl to marry. You won't be able to wait for when Yuan. Su Mo smiled lightly. Kong Chao still smiled slightly. I didn't deliberately wait. It's just that I haven't found a suitable one. I don't want to force myself and I don't want to delay others. He got up and left. Su Mo sat in the coffee shop under the afternoon sun. She sat there for the whole afternoon. She was heartbroken. She confessed, but the man didn't like her. She found Wen Yuan and wanted to eat and drink with him. Recently, Yi Hui had gone to school, so Wen Yuan was more free. It was okay to eat, but she didn't dare to drink because Yimubai would get angry. He would object to everything that he thought a woman shouldn't have. If she didn't change, he would get angry. So, when Wen Yuan brought it up, he was a little shaken. Su Mo said that she broke up with her boyfriend and wants me to accompany her. Yimubai sat on the sofa and read a magazine. It's going to be dinner soon. You can ask her to come here to eat. Yimubai. Wen Yuan said a little fiercely. Su Mo said she was heartbroken. What's wrong with me asking her to come to our house? He held the magazine and smiled. Are you afraid that she will seduce me? Yimubai. Wen Yuan glared at him. You're talking nonsense. He put down the magazine, crossed his hands, and coughed softly. Then tell me, she was heartbroken. Why didn't I hear that she was in love before? Who was she heartbroken with? Wen Yuan looked at him blankly. I didn't ask. Shouldn't I ask this later? He pulled her into his arms and let her lie on his lap. He punched her butt. Do you know who she met today? Wen Yuan pretended not to understand. Yimubai lifted her chin, it's Kong Chao. Madam Yi, do you think I'll let you go to her and let her talk with you all night about Concho? Wen Yuan looked at him and said, then, are we just going to ignore her? Mubai, Su Mo is my friend. She added, Su Mo doesn't have many friends. He snorted coldly. That's because she has a weird temper and is greedy for money. All of her friends have been cheated. Only a fool like Wen Yuan, who had a mountain of gold and silver in his family that Su Mo had swindled out of, was able to preserve their friendship. After he said this, Wen Yuan was stunned. After a long time, he said, Yimubai, Suemo isn't that kind of person. He gazed at her and smiled faintly. You can ask her yourself. But she's also very stupid. When Yuan thought that he would not agree, but Yimubai changed his tone and said, You can go, but when Yuan, don't drink, or I'll break your legs when I come back. You only know how to use domestic violence. She muttered discontentedly. Then he smiled. When my brother and Shirley got married, they fought fiercely. When Yuan, do you want me to show you what real domestic violence is? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidants. Chapter 39-48. When Yuan stared at him with an infuriating gaze. He smiled and got up. Where are you going? I'll take you there. She pulled him. No, I'll drive myself. Yimubai leaned forward and bit the tip of her nose. Mrs. Yi, this is one of the conditions. Otherwise, there will be no benefits. When Yuan looked at him. But you had a meeting the whole afternoon today. Don't go if you feel sorry for me. He looked at her and smiled. When Yuan got up. I'll go upstairs to change. He pulled her. She turned around. What's wrong? Yimubai's voice was hoarse. Dress conservatively. When Yuan smiled and turned to go upstairs. When he went downstairs, he changed into a set of very casual clothes and tied his hair into a ponytail. He was very satisfied with it. In the car, when Yuan looked at his handsome side profile from time to time. Are you angry? He gestured and smiled. Yes, I'm angry. You've been working hard all day, and your wife has to accompany someone else. When Yuan was unhappy. I'm with you every day. Now that she thought about it, she felt that something was wrong. She was now like a pendant on his body. He took her everywhere he went. Yi Hui was sent to school by him, but she went to his company every day to report. When she didn't want to go, he would say that the incident with Zhang Meng meant that she didn't go to his company often, which was why there was a misunderstanding. When Yuan felt that he was very diligent. It was obvious that he wanted someone to accompany him every day. Every time she made up her mind not to go to the company with him, he always had a way to torture her in bed. She either went to the company or in bed. When Yuan missed her husband so much, that he was not so powerful because he was too tired. The more she thought about it, the less she wanted to talk to him. She turned her face to the side. Yimubai looked at her and said softly, right now, you're indirectly interacting with someone who likes you. When Yuan, I'm not angry yet. Why are you angry? She stared at him. He was really good at changing the concept, and when Yuan couldn't defend himself. Later, she ignored him in a fit of pique until he sent her to a fish house. He unfastened her seatbelt and smiled. No drinking. When Yuan got out of the car and closed the door, he stuck out his tongue at him. I just drink. He found it funny and infuriating at the same time. This was the first time when Yuan acted like this. But it felt good. Yimubai originally wanted to drive back, but thinking that the aunties at home were all there, he was too lazy to drive back, so he directly waited for when Yuan here. Although he was also very familiar with Su Mo, he was not interested in two women having a meal together, especially when the male lead was Kong Chiao. The reason why he was so generous was because their relationship had been good recently. He sat in the car, smoked a few cigarettes, and then scrolled through his phone. When Yuan didn't know that he didn't leave, so he went to find Su Mo. Su Mo sat in the corner and ordered a platter, waiting to be served. What surprised when Yuan was that Su Mo actually ordered ergotu. When Yuan sat down, and Sumo looked up at her before pouring himself a glass of ergotu. He then looked at Wen Yuan and said, "You drink. Pour it for me as well." Wen Yuan said indifferently. Sumo's hand that was holding the bottle trembled. "Aren't you afraid that Yimubai will skin you alive?" Wen Yuan looked at Sumo. "What I'm most afraid of is him taking off my clothes." After she said that, Sumo laughed and trembled. "Wen Yuan, is it true? I'm not lying to you, he's very good." Wen Yuan poured himself a glass. "If he doesn't let me drink, I'll drink it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for confidants." Chapter 39-49. Sumo looked at Wen Yuan blankly and said after a long time, "Aren't you afraid that your CEO Yi will take off your clothes?" "I'm not afraid." Wen Yuan took a sip of wine and felt that it was spicy. Then she complained, "He will take it off every day anyway." She raised her glass and clinked it with Sumo. "Don't think too highly of men. They are not good people. It's better to be single." Sumo clinked her glass with Wen Yuan and watched him take another sip. She felt that something was wrong. She was the one who wanted to drown her sorrows, so why did Wen Yuan drink it? She coughed lightly. "There are many women who want CEO Yi to take off their clothes. Wen Yuan, don't take it for granted." Then Sumo looked down at her airport. "Look, I'm being despised by others. Xiong Xiao, I don't even know if he is a little boy or not." Wen Yuan laughed, then she leaned over and whispered, "When I was learning piano with Kong Chiao's mother, many of Kong Chiao's schoolmates chased after him. Their school was circulating about Kong Chiao's nude photos." "It's true, Sumo. You can look forward to it." Sumo looked at Wen Yuan suspiciously. "You know about this?" "My teacher will tell me." Wen Yuan smiled and began to brush the fish. "Maybe my teacher wanted to mess with us at that time, but, you know what happened later." Sumo was stunned for a long time before she said in a low voice, "I thought Kong Chiao's mother was arrogant because of the Kong family's scholarly background. My teacher can be very avant-garde sometimes." Wen Yuan sighed softly, feeling a little nostalgic. It had been a long time since she last saw her teacher. She heard that her teacher was not in good health and wanted to visit him, but she was afraid that Yimubai would be unhappy, so Wen Yuan didn't dare to mention it. Now that she thought about it, she felt sorry for her teacher. But Sumo's focus wasn't on this. She asked in a low voice, "So Kong Chiao's mother taught you to take the risk and plot to sleep with Yimubai? Lower your voice." Wen Yuan looked around. "No, I just wanted to be with him. As long as I loved him, it didn't matter if he loved me or not. But later, I realized that it's very painful not to be loved." Sumo. She placed her hand on the back of Sumo's hand. "Promise me that you'll treat yourself well. Don't force yourself. It's good to be free sometimes." Sumo's throat felt a little sore as he nodded. "I understand." The two of them fell silent for a while. After eating some fish and drinking some wine, Sumo smiled and said, "I won't settle for a man who thinks I'm too small." Wen Yuan was right. Sumo said, "I want to go to Longxiong." Wen Yuan was speechless. Sumo said, "I'm not ugly. There are a lot of people chasing after me, from here to France. He didn't like me, so I slept with him and then kicked him away." Wen Yuan was also a little drunk. He held Sumo's arm and said, "That's right, sleep with him." She rested her face on Sumo's arm. "Remember to wear a t-shirt. Otherwise, it'll be bad if you get pregnant like me." "I don't want to get married," she murmured. "I have to get married. I still have to endure a man with a bad temper." I even have to let him strip me every day and play all kinds of mysterious games. He's too perverted. Sue Mo was not completely drunk. She could hold her liquor well because she was a girl from the north. She was dumbfounded. Then, she quickly took out her phone and set it to recording mode. When Yuan, what hobbies does Yimubai have? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidants. Chapter 3950. When Yuan lay on his stomach and laughed like a little girl. After a long time, he spat out a few words. He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here. Sue Mo's heart was trembling. Wow, that was so exciting. She cleared her throat. How many times can your CEO do it in a night? How many times? When Yuan shook his head. I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 to 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Sue Mo, there's nothing good about marriage. It's over if you meet a pervert. Sue Mo sighed. You obviously enjoy it. She grabbed her hair. A well-fed man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Sue Mo made when Yuan drunk, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't expect when Yuan's alcohol tolerance to be so bad. Now, she could only call Yimubai and brace herself to say that when Yuan was drunk. In less than 5 minutes, her President Yi magically appeared. Sue Mo looked at him and stuttered, CEO Yi, you are here. Yimubai stood and looked at his wife, who was drunk like mud. Sue Mo was fine. Sue Mo worked in public relations. Not to mention being able to drink 1,000 cups of wine, she could easily knock out 3 or 4 men. When Yuan was really a pig for drinking erguotu with her. Yimubai looked at Sue Mo and said calmly, I forgot to tell you that Kong Chiao is also in this restaurant, on the 3rd floor. Sue Mo was stunned. What a coincidence. After Yimubai finished speaking, he carried his wife in his arms. How embarrassing. How could she eat herself to such an extent while drinking hot pot? When he walked out, Sue Mo called out to him, by the way, CEO Yi, I have a gift for you. I'll send you a message. He looked at her and snorted. It'd better be to my satisfaction. Sue Mo put on a fake smile and said ambiguously, the nightclub will be satisfied. Yimubai walked out and carried Wen Yuan into the car. Then, he received Sue Mo's so-called gift. It was a voice message. He thought about it and opened it. Wen Yuan's voice came out along with Sue Mo's voice. He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald. How many times can your CEO do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he's especially perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 in the morning until 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Sue Mo, there's nothing good about marriage. If you meet a pervert, it's over. You clearly enjoy it. Yimubai listened a few times, then turned his head to look at the drunk cat beside him. He smiled faintly and started the car. When he returned home, he was in a good mood. He had already thought of a way to teach her a lesson. He would say that he liked to do it from behind. He remembered that she was the one who liked it the most when he tortured her from behind. She liked to do it to him. After Yimubai took Wen Yuan away, Sue Mo sat alone. She did not leave immediately but chose to sit there and drink. She drank 4 bottles of erguotu and got herself drunk. Later, she vomited on the other side of the road. She lay there and vomited terribly. In fact, it was not the first time she did this. Many times, she had to drink a lot when dealing with clients. Once, she even slept on the street. When she woke up the next day, there were a few 10 yuan bills beside her. They were given by a few children who treated her like a homeless person. When she sat up, she smelled the stench on her body. She felt that she was no different from the roadside. This time, she only wanted to get drunk for herself. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 39:51. When Kong Chiao was about to drive away, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. It was Su Mo. She was wearing the bourgeois clothes he saw today, which cost tens of thousands, but she was lying on the side of the road like a cat or dog. Kong Chiao stopped the car, jumped out, and walked straight to Su Mo. Su Mo was wearing a suit that cost tens of thousands of yuan. She climbed on the divider like a monkey and looked at him with a silly smile. She was really drunk, but she knew him. Kong Chiao looked at the traffic around and frowned. Su Mo, come here. She refused and refused to get down. She shouted at him, I'm very young. I won't meet a pervert on the road. Kong Chiao was helpless. Come down, I'll take you home. Su Mo looked at him. I'll go with you if you take me home. Kong Chiao thought for a moment and nodded. Come down, I'll take you home. He reached out to pick her up. When Su Mo threw herself into his arms, she bit her lip. I want to make love to you. Kong Chiao hugged her. At this moment, he was a little embarrassed. Then he scolded her. Girls shouldn't say such things. You're not a good person. Su Mo put her arms around his neck. I'll do anything to get what I want. Are you sure you still want to take me home? Kong Chiao carried her all the way to the car. He wasn't alone in the car. There was a very decent woman in the car. Su Mo was drunk, but she also knew that it was a woman sitting in the passenger seat. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to get out of the car and drive back by herself. Kong Chiao fastened the seat belt and said coldly, believe it or not, I'll really throw you out of here if you keep making trouble. Su Mo stopped and then looked at the woman in front of her. She felt that she was very beautiful and big from the side. She didn't say anything and lay in the back obediently. After a while, she muttered, don't you like Wen Yuan very much? Kong Chiao, you're such a hypocrite. Is she your sex friend? After she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the car was quite strange. Kong Chiao could only apologize to the woman beside him. She drank too much. The woman didn't care much. Just drop me off at the intersection. Kong Chiao, we'll talk about the specific cooperation next time. She smiled. You may have some personal affairs to deal with now. Kong Chiao sighed, just a friend. She likes you. The woman hit the nail on the head. Kong Chiao didn't say anything. She stopped the car in front of them and got out to send them off before getting back into the car. Su Mo had already fallen asleep in the back seat of his car. He frowned and wanted to ask her where she lived, but after thinking about it, he decided to let her stay for one night. He drove back to his apartment, which was located on the top floor of a certain apartment in the elite area of B City. It was about 200 square meters and very spacious for one person to live in. In fact, he was rarely in B City and spent most of his time flying around the world. Su Mo had fallen asleep and was still holding on to her bag. He carried her out of the car and kicked the door shut. When they arrived at his apartment, he brought her to the guest room without hesitation. He thought that she would be well behaved, but as soon as she laid down, she tugged at her clothes and said that it was hot and that she wanted to take a bath. Kong Chiao's temper was considered good. He patiently filled the bathtub with hot water and carried her in. Soak yourself for a while. Call me when you're done. Su Mo sat on the floor and looked at him pitifully. Aren't you going to help me take off my clothes? When Yuan said that Yimu Bai likes to take off her clothes the most. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidants. Chapter 3952. Kong Chiao's eyes darkened, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he squatted down and looked into her eyes. Su Mo, don't try to provoke me. It's not good for a woman to flirt with a man. Su Mo knelt on the ground and straightened her body. She grabbed his tie and pulled him in front of her. She leaned in and said, "You don't dare, do you? Kong Chiao, aren't you still a virgin?" He stared at her with a deep gaze. Su Mo was still provoking him. "Do you know how it feels to be a woman?" She put his hand on her waist and let him hug her. "I have everything except for my breasts. Kong Chiao, do you want to try?" His Adam's apple moved slightly and he threw her into the bathtub. "You need to wake up." Su Mo screamed in the water. "I don't know how to swim." He didn't want to talk to her, but in the end, his heart softened. He turned around and glared at her. "Su Mo, don't you have any shame?" She rushed out of the water, and Kong Chiao was stunned. Where were her clothes? Su Mo slowly walked out of the bathtub and slowly walked to his side. Before he could react, she hugged his neck and kissed him. After a while, she moved to his Adam's apple and bit it. "I heard from Wen Yuan that your nude photos are very. I really want to see them." Kong Chiao was shocked and angry. "Su Mo, are you still a woman? You can check." She was drunk and had been rejected. Anyway, there was nothing worse than this. Wen Yuan was right. It was good that she couldn't sleep with him. Moreover, a drunk Su Mo was a hooligan. She touched everywhere. Kong Chiao grabbed her hand and put it behind her back. He said in a low voice, "Don't play with fire. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear it." Su Mo's fingers slowly moved down, and under his gaze, it wasn't her first time. That man had left her when something happened to her family. At that time, Su Mo had decided not to love any bastard anymore. However, she fell in love with Kong Chiao. It was probably because of his obsession with Wen Yuan. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were like lightning and fire. Kong Chiao was not gentle. When it came to such matters, he gave off a completely different vibe than usual. He was forceful and even rough. He threw her onto the soft bed and did it again and again. That night, Su Mo begged for mercy until her voice was hoarse, but he still didn't let her go. By the time it was over, it was already 2 in the morning. He leaned against the bed and smoked. Su Mo moved a little under the blanket, and he lowered his gaze. "Are you sober now?" Su Mo pulled up the blanket and looked at it. "What Wen Yuan said is true." Kong Chiao put out the cigarette and said calmly, "I won't take responsibility." Although Su Mo had already known that she would only sleep with him once, she still felt a little hurt when she heard this. She forced a smile and said, "I know, I was the one who took the initiative." At that time, she had been so proactive. Only a man would be able to hold himself back. She knew that she was not ugly. Although her figure was flat, she was still somewhat seductive because she was thin. Kong Chiao looked at her silently for a moment and suddenly said, "Don't worry about getting pregnant. I've taken precautions." Su Mo's face was burning as though she had been slapped. She lowered her gaze. "Are you afraid that I'll cling to you?" No, I just don't want to lose another innocent life before I think it through. Just for a night of pleasure. He said calmly before lifting the blanket and getting up. He put on his trousers and was about to return to his bedroom. Let's leave at daybreak. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 39:53. He had only taken a few steps when Sue Mo immediately got off the bed and hugged him from behind. She shamelessly used the humblest tone she had ever used in her life and let go of all her pride. Is it really impossible between us? He did not turn around and only said, I have a condom here. Sue Mo, you're an adult, so you should understand that I'm not a pure man. I have a woman. It was just a special woman. He might call her once a month, and she was of a higher class. Sue Mo's grip loosened and she was stunned. She had not expected such an answer. She had always thought that a man like Kong Chiao would be especially clean. Hadn't he always been waiting for Wen Yuan? He turned around. I do like Wen Yuan, but she's already someone else's wife. I won't have any improper thoughts. So, you've always had women, and the kind that you bought with money? Sue Mo felt as if she had swallowed a fly and was disgusted. He nodded before looking at her. I told you a long time ago that it's not good to play around with men. Sue Mo, I'm not the perfect man you think I am, and I'm not Prince Charming either. I'm just an ordinary man with lust, and I'll be able to differentiate between flesh and soul. He paused. If you feel that I'm suitable, you can come to me again. Sue Mo was disgusted. She covered the blanket in front of her and said with a trembling voice, Did you plan to spend the night with the woman in the car today? No, he replied quickly. But I've had sex with her twice. Sue Mo, you're also in the entertainment industry. Isn't this normal? We take what we need and get together because of benefits. Once the benefits are over, we separate. Sue Mo laughed. She took a lighter from the bed and lit up another cigarette. She took a deep puff and said, So Wen Yuan is the white moonlight in your heart. She's very clean, so you want to marry her. Kong Chiao, do you think you're worthy of Wen Yuan when you're so dirty? You've slept with so many women, and perhaps many of them are old women. Sue Mo's hand that was holding the cigarette was trembling and her voice was almost hysterical. You don't deserve to like Wen Yuan at all. You still want her to pursue her dream and sleep with anyone like you. Kong Chiao looked at her calmly. Sue Mo, have you ever sold your own body? Sue Mo stared at him and took a few more drags of the cigarette. Then, she pressed the cigarette butt out. She got off the bed and walked straight to him. She raised her hand and slapped him in the face. Then, tears welled up in her eyes. I only sell my skills, not my body. Kong Chiao, you listen to me, tonight I've been a prostitute, you name your price. He didn't say anything. She took out a checkbook from her bag and wrote a few numbers on it. 1 million. You're worth this much. She threw it to him and took 2 steps back. Her eyes were bloodshot. She felt that he was even worse than her first love. That man just didn't want to take it. On the other hand, Kong Chiao slept with so many people in order to become famous and gain what he needed. She knew too well what kind of people slept with him when they just entered the circle. She had always thought that Kong Chiao was clean. As it turned out, he was already so dirty that he could not be seen. Sue Mo didn't cry. She just felt disgusted. She was bitten by a dog, and she was the one who took the initiative. She went to the bathroom and took her clothes out of the water. She put them on while they were wet. She rushed out of his bedroom with her bag. She had to leave in the middle of the night. She couldn't stay with such a man, not even for a minute. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. On WeChat, she followed Yudu literature. Talking about life, looking for bosom friends. Chapter 3954. When she reached the door, her arm was caught and she was brought into a firm embrace. He lowered his head and looked at her with a contorted face. "You've seen the true side of me. Are you disgusted?" His fingers caressed her face gently as he said hoarsely, "Weren't you satisfied with my performance when you moaned so happily earlier on?" Su Mo looked at him and patted him. "Let go of me, Kong Chiao. Let go of me." At this moment, she was a little afraid. She felt as though she had seen a demon. Kong Chiao was not like this and she did not want to listen anymore because it was too disgusting. He held her down easily with one arm as he leaned over and said in a low voice, "You're disgusting. You've slept with me too, Su Mo. I've already said that you should stay away from me. A man like me will never give in unless I'm willing. Then, you can just wait to be slept with by old women one after another." She roared at him, her voice almost tearing her heart out. The next second, she was thrown onto the bed. Kong Chiao stood by the bed and looked at her coldly. "It's not what you think it is. Are you angry from embarrassment?" "Su Mo, I'm very expensive. I'm not interested in $1 million." In front of her, he tore the check into shreds and said in a cold voice, "Don't worry, I won't touch you again. I don't lack women, and I'm not the kind of person you think I am. Su Mo, we've never interacted before, and you're not a child anymore. Isn't this kind of love between a man and a woman supposed to be consensual?" Su Mo bit her lips and looked at his expressionless face. This Kong Chiao was the real Kong Chiao, a top-notch celebrity who had been in the entertainment industry for many years. Suddenly, she laughed. That's right, she was really silly. Other than someone with a family background like Yimubai's, how could anyone else leave with a clean conscience? It was impossible to obtain a Vanity Fair like this without paying a price. She smiled at him and did not say anything, but tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. She was still a little upset, but she did not know what she was upset about. Actually, Kong Chiao was right. The industry was like this. It was normal for him to pursue fame and fortune. It was her brain that short-circuited. She had forgotten what Yimubai had said to her. He had said, "Don't look for a man from the entertainment industry." Su Mo wiped his tears and said, "Kong Chiao, don't worry. Today's matter ends here. I won't slander you. You can still be the prince of the violin, but don't hang around when Yuan anymore. You really don't deserve her. Yimubai is the most suitable person for her." "Because of his background?" Kong Chiao asked coldly. Su Mo smiled. "That's right, some things are destined by the heavens. There's nothing we can do about it." Just like herself, her family background was not something that she could choose for herself. However, she did not sell her body and only slept with the men she liked. Kong Chiao was her second man. It was disgusting. She undressed, went to the bathroom to shower, and climbed under the covers when she returned. After a while, the voice said, "Thank you for taking me in. I will leave tomorrow morning." Concho stood at the foot of the bed, frowning. Su Mo did not say anything else. He just lay there quietly. He stood there for a while before returning to his bedroom. After returning to his bedroom and lying on the bed, Kong Chiao's emotions could not calm down for a long time. Today, he had lost his composure. He could have not told Su Mo these things that no one knew about. These were the secrets of the entertainment industry, but he did not expect Su Mo to be so different. Chapter 39:55. Every time she looked at him, it was as if she was looking at a saint. Kong Qiao knew exactly what she thought of him. He found it a little ridiculous. He had never been in love with her because she wasn't his type and she couldn't afford to play around. However, when she hugged the fence and told him that she wanted to go home with him, he was tempted. The little devil in his heart wanted to tear away the layer of hope in her heart. He wanted to see how she would react after knowing what kind of person he was. It would be interesting. In the end, she cried. Actually, it was quite good. She wouldn't look at him like that anymore. It was annoying. He had never been a perfect person. She didn't have to be like that. The feeling of tearing her little heart apart with his own hands was subtle and satisfying. Of course, her body was unexpectedly soft and immature. She probably hadn't had a man for a long time. When he first took her, she was in pain. Her subtle expression couldn't fool him. Kong Qiao hid a strange feeling in his heart. He convinced himself that it was the first time he met such a stupid woman who thought the world was so beautiful. He sneered and closed his eyes to sleep. At dawn, Kong Qiao got up. He felt that something was missing in the air. He got up and went to the guest room. Su Mo was no longer there. She still wore those wet clothes and left, taking everything here with her, including the t-shirt he had used. This was the first time a woman was willing to clean up the battlefield, but he had an indescribable feeling. He guessed that she didn't want to leave any traces. She didn't want to admit that they had done it. That was it. He stood there quietly, watching her leave, fleeing in panic. He was very dirty. Other than Wen Yuan, who was the white moon in his heart, he could only watch from afar. And now, he didn't want to touch Su Mo. If sleeping with her once could make her smart enough to run far away. He went back to the bedroom to sleep. However, he couldn't fall asleep after lying on the bed. The moment he closed his eyes, he thought of Su Mo lying under him. She wasn't the most beautiful, but she was especially seductive when she took the initiative. That was why he came again and again last night. However, there wouldn't be a next time. Kong Qiao was a man who followed the rules of the game. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to survive in this circle. Unable to fall asleep, he simply sat up, lit a cigarette, and smoked quietly. In the master bedroom on the second floor of the villa. Yimubai had woken up a long time ago and had been staring at his wife. Wen Yuan was still asleep. He reached out and gently scratched her face. She still didn't wake up. Instead, she turned over and curled up in his arms, wrapping one arm around his neck. Wen Yuan. He leaned over and nibbled on her ear. Wen Yuan was woken up by him. She had a bad temper recently, so she bit the tip of his nose hard and accidentally tore it. Yimubai felt the pain and reached out to grab her hair and pull her back. Wen Yuan, you're a puppy. She was still sleepy, so she buried her face in his chest and pressed her warm lips against his chest, causing Yimubai's blood to boil. He grabbed her and refused to let her bury her face in his chest. When at him. She wanted to at him. At him sick. She had to say. At him as he wanted to say. When as she had at as she wanted. As at her at Wen Yuan. And she wanted to get her. Chapter 39:56. Wen Yuan was fully awake. She looked at the place where she had bitten. It was red and swollen. She bit her lip and coughed. Who told you to wake me up so early in the morning? He was still staring at her. You heard it. She looked at him, speechless, and then stared at him what do you want? Yimubai gently grabbed her hair and moved it closer, I wanted to stop hurting. When Yuan's face was buried there, she screamed, Yimubai, you are a pervert. He laughed in a low voice, very happy, and pulled her head to look at him again. Do you dare to do this again? She didn't say anything, but buried her face in his mouth and let him nibble on it. It was a kind of healing. He felt a little itchy, and his voice almost trembled when Yuan. I don't like it anymore. She smiled naughtily, hugging his neck with her arms, and said in a coquettish voice. He lowered his head, stared at her, and then pressed her down. He kissed her hard for a long time, and then said breathlessly, You're killing me. Go on. When Yuan murmured, I thought you didn't like it. He closed his eyes to enjoy it, and his voice was vague, all men like it. He made a sound as if he was in pain. When Yuan couldn't go on anymore, she leaned over and said warmly, Yimubai, you're even more promiscuous than a woman. He opened his eyes and stared at her for a while. Then he took the phone from the bedside, turned the volume to the maximum, and played a conversation. He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here. How many times can he do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He doesn't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2:00 to 6:00 in the morning. I'm so tired, Sumo. Before she finished playing, when Yuan grabbed the phone and hung up, she blushed and gritted her teeth. You are so hateful. Mr. Yi looked at her lazily. Isn't it Sumo who told me? Why don't you talk about her? When Yuan thought of Sumo and hurriedly asked, how did she get back yesterday? She can hold her liquor very well, unless she wants to get drunk. But last night, Kong Chiao was also in that shop. You didn't see him? As Yimubai spoke, he began to work neatly. He whispered into her ear, be quiet later. Don't moan so recklessly, okay? Her face was red and her heart was beating fast. She pushed him, I'm talking to you about something serious. He chuckled, hugged her from behind, and bit her ear. Is this your favorite? When Yuan's face was so red that it was about to bleed, he reached out his hand and said, Yimubai, you, don't be like this. Didn't you say I liked it the most? He leaned against her back and sprinkled a string of small kisses on her shoulders, teasing her until she begged for mercy like a little kitten. He admired her anxious look, but he still did not let her go. You said I like to grab your hair. When Yuan, my hair is going bald because of you. Do you want to see? She said no, praised him with all her might, and told him all the things that he loved to hear. Yimubai was still laughing in a low voice, torturing her to death. After that, when Yuan soaked in the bathtub and scolded Sumo in his heart, then he gritted his teeth and thought that she had served him so well just now, and he didn't let her go. Chapter 3957. When Yuan took out his phone and dialed Sumo's number, Sumo took a long time to answer. When Yuan wanted to ridicule her, but Sumo's voice was so hoarse that she couldn't help but be a little stunned. Sumo, what's wrong with you? Sumo rubbed her nose. Nothing, I just caught a cold. When Yuan nodded and then remembered something. By the way, did you give the recording to Yimubai? Sumo smiled and said bitterly, didn't it increase our feelings? You were tortured, weren't you? When Yuan wanted to say something, but he felt that Sumo was strange, so he only said that they would have coffee next time. But when he hung up the phone, he remembered that Yimubai said that Kong Chiao was also there. She should ask Sumo if she had seen him later. Just when she was about to call him, Yimubai came in. He was already neatly dressed and walking towards her. When Yuan admitted that she used to be his dog for appearances, and now, it seemed that she still was. Yimubai squatted down and looked at her puppy-like expression. He smiled and said, "Are you going to send Xiangnan and Yihui with me, or are you going to stay at home and bring me lunch? I want to sleep for a while more. My head is still a little dizzy." She went to hug him, and he let her hug him. After a while, he deliberately frowned. "You've made me wet. Should I take a bath too?" She immediately stopped herself and said no. He was really hot at any time. Yimubai smiled and stopped teasing her. He said in a hoarse voice, "Then I'll go first." He scratched her face again. "If I still do this to you at night, you'll be good." She remembered how she was tortured by him from behind, and her face was extremely red. She pulled his hand. "Mubai, there's something I want to tell you." He grunted and reached his hand into the bathtub. He grasped it in a few strokes and played with it from time to time. She had a favor to ask of him, so even if he went too far, she still let him be. She said softly, "Teacher is not in good health. I want to see her." He was surprised. Kong Chao's mother. Then he added, "Didn't you just see her?" She looked at him and moved closer to his hand to please him. She hung her hands around his neck. "Mubai, teacher is sick. I should go and see her." His hands were not idle. He pondered for a while and said, "I'll go with you." "When?" She was shocked and frowned. "Isn't that bad? What's not good about it?" He squeezed hard, and when Yuan immediately cried out, but she did not dare to struggle, and obediently let him touch her until he pleased her. Perhaps because of her good attitude, Yimubai didn't reject her immediately. "Tomorrow morning. I'll ask Secretary He to spare some time. I can't do it today. I have to discuss a collaboration with CEO Chin of King Entertainment." When Yuan hummed, "Is it Chin Mo?" He finally retracted his hand and lowered his gaze to look at his fingers. When Yuan bit his lower lip and felt very embarrassed. He leaned over to kiss her and wrote a few words on her back. She was startled. His voice was low and pleasant. "You still say you don't like it, huh?" She let him do whatever he wanted and continued to act coquettishly in his arms. "Mubai, can you do it? I'll go with you tomorrow morning." He did not allow her to refuse and kissed her. When Yuan did not say anything. She was a little unhappy, but since he was willing to go with her, it was fine. It was good to let teacher see him. Chapter 39:58. Yimubai raised his hand to look at the time and smiled. He gently pressed his finger on her lips, hinting that when Yuan's face turned red. "I'm leaving. I'll go to the company at noon, okay?" He finally got up and left. When Yuan watched his back as he slid into the bathtub again. She felt ashamed when she thought about how he had treated her just now. When did she become so accommodating? When Yuan soaked for a while more and got up. She put on a bathrobe and thought about it before calling Su Mo. Su Mo was busy. She called a few more times but couldn't get through, so she could only give up. When she went to the company at noon, she specially asked Secretary He. Secretary He asked about it and said that Manager Su had a cold and was on leave. When Secretary He mentioned this, he smiled. This isn't Manager Su's style. Manager Su used to be called Su Senpai. He didn't treat colds as illnesses and drank alcohol as usual. I guess his health isn't as good as before. When Yuan thanked him and came back from Secretary He's place. Yimubai had already finished his work and was sitting on the sofa waiting for Wen Yuan to eat. When she came back, she gave him a cold shoulder. He couldn't help but laugh. "What's wrong now?" he said lazily, did you not feel comfortable serving me in the morning? When Yuan sat beside him and began to work on the lunchbox. She glanced at him. I was the one who served you. Yimubai smiled and then hooked her chin. Isn't it good that you didn't even have breakfast? He was really vulgar. When Yuan looked away. Let's eat. He smiled and ate with her. After a while, when Yuan still asked him, Su-mo, can you let her drink less in the future? You're blaming me. He smiled lazily and then reached out to grab Wen Yuan. I remember that Mrs. Yi isn't that kind, nor is she overflowing with love. Wen Yuan looked at him. It's not easy for Su-mo, yes. So you have to do what you can, Yimubai said coldly. If she continues like this, she will kill herself one day. Wen Yuan looked at him. What's wrong with her? He didn't want to tell her. He didn't want her to come into contact with those things. In his heart, Wen Yuanhe should live in a greenhouse forever. She only needed to stay by his side gracefully and beautifully. Yimubai smiled. It's nothing. She just likes to help others. She's a bit stupid. He paused for a moment. Su-mo paid for Zhang Meng's breach of contract. Wen Yuan bit his lip. Can't you just not accept her? She doesn't have to work so hard. He will be defeated sooner or later. He pinched her face and said in a low and husky voice, Wen Yuan, personal relationships are personal relationships, but you can't have them at work. Do you understand? She just looked at him and said nothing. Angry again. Pinching her cheeks, he thought for a moment and said, she needs money, so she transferred 1% in Starlight's shares to me. 200 million, so she doesn't need to drink too much for now. Wen Yuan pursed his lips. But there's always a time to spend money. He patted her. That's 200 million, Mrs. Yi. She looked at him eagerly. Is 200 million a lot? He looked at her with a strange expression. After a while, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. When he let go of her, he hummed. You did it on purpose, didn't you? Wen Yuan laughed. He hummed and let go of her and began to eat. Wen Yuan lay in his arms and said in a low voice, Are you angry? Chapter 39:59. He looked at her and took her down. Be good and eat. She refused to hug him from behind. She buried her face in his back and nibbled on his muscles through the fabric of his shirt. Yimubai paused and then looked at her. Wen Yuan, it's okay if you don't want to eat. She immediately stopped making a fuss and obediently ate with him. Yimubai glanced at her and suddenly said, I don't want to be like Su-mo, Wen Yuan. I'd rather be selfish. He sighed. That will be hard. Wen Yuan looked at him. Can't she change? She can't. I've told her many times not to worry about things that she can't control, but she's still so kind. But there's a way. He looked at her. Wen Yuan nodded. What is it? Find her a rich long-term meal ticket. He said softly. She let out an "ah" and looked at him. He smiled and then said meaningfully, Kong Chiao is not bad. Doesn't Su-mo like him? Don't you want to play with him? Wen Yuan looked at him in disbelief. Didn't you forbid me to contact Kong Chiao? That was in the past. Now, it's different. Yimubai stroked her long hair and thought. Kong Chiao is in his 30s. Didn't Wen Yuan say that teacher has been anxious about his marriage? Su-mo is not bad. You just said that she's a trap. Wen Yuan looked at him. He smiled. Did I say that? That's right. Wen Yuan thought about it carefully. I'll try. Yimubai looked at her and sighed in his heart. Actually, Wen Yuan was really simple. She was a single-celled creature. All her schemes were probably used to chase after him. Wen Yuan had already started to plan in her heart. She was absent-minded. Yimubai was secretly amused. Wen Yuan was really a treasure girl. It was probably because she hadn't gone out to work in the past few years. Early the next morning, Yimubai asked the chauffeur to send the two kids to school. He brought Wen Yuan to buy some fruits and flowers. They wanted to buy lilies, but Wen Yuan said that the teacher had rhinitis, so carnations were fine. He let her choose, and after paying, he took her to the hospital. Kong Chiao followed his mother's surname. Although teacher Kong was staying in the hospital, he was resting and did not have any major problems. However, it was inconvenient for him to stay alone, so he decided to stay for more than 10 days. Teacher Kong kept saying that Kong Chiao was using up public resources. Kong Chiao poured water for her mother as she sat down. This place is usually empty, so it's not occupied. Not many people stayed in the ward that cost 10,000 yuan a night. Besides, his mother didn't want to stay with him, and she didn't want to hire a nurse to take care of her. He could only come to see her every day. Fortunately, he would be fine after a few days. Teacher Kong sighed. I've always felt uneasy. I've been teaching all my life and I've always been clean. Now, it's too wasteful. Kong Chiao smiled faintly. Mom, you're thinking too much. Let's see if any of the students you teach are clean. Mother Kang's face turned stern. She's also someone who loves fame and fortune. I've said it before. It's good to be a professor in a music academy, but she insisted on going abroad. As she said that, she sighed. Actually, Wen Yuan is very good. Kong Chiao said bitterly, Mom, why are you mentioning this? Back then, if he hadn't gone abroad, it would have been impossible for him and Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan's family was very prominent, and she had no feelings for him. Chapter 3960. While Kong Chiao and Mrs. Kong were talking, Yimubai and Wen Yuan were standing at the door with a nurse. When Kong Chiao saw them, he was stunned. Then, the atmosphere became awkward. Yimubai was the first to speak. Wen Yuan, please have a chat. Kong Chiao and I will go outside for a smoke. Although he said that, he still helped Wen Yuan carry the gifts in and greeted Ms. Kong politely. It was Ms. Kang's first time seeing Yimubai. She had seen him in movies before. He was more mature and introverted in real life. Ms. Kong sighed in her heart. What kind of family did he come from? Kong Chiao really couldn't compare. Yimubai comforted the old man and went out with Kong Chiao. Wen Yuan helped Mrs. Kong to sit down. Miss Kong, how are you feeling? Mrs. Kong smiled and put her hand on the back of her hand. I'm fine. It's just an old problem. Kong Chiao was worried and wanted me to stay in the hospital. It's boring here. Wen Yuan remembered what Kong Chiao had said to her before and tried to persuade her. Miss Kong, Kong Chiao is flying all over the world. You should hire an auntie to take care of him. That way, he will feel more at ease. Ms. Kong was silent for a while and said in a low voice, Actually, I'm afraid that with an auntie, Kong Chiao will come back less often. She paused. It's not appropriate to say this, but Wen Yuan knows that Kong Chiao has something on his mind. He doesn't really want to come back. He might not want to face it. Ms. Kong sighed. He has made a lot of money these years. They call him a music genius. What genius? His music has lost its soul. It's just techniques. It's very exaggerated. Wen Yuan couldn't say anything. Actually, she had noticed it last time. Ms. Kong changed the topic. Let's not talk about this. Wen Yuan, I heard that you're doing well recently. I'm very happy for you. Wen Yuan pursed his lips. He's all right. Ms. Kong smiled. He's very handsome. As Yimu Bai's pride dog, Wen Yuan smiled a little foolishly. At this moment, another wave of students came to visit Teacher Kong. They were all doing quite well. Some were running private training classes, some were going abroad, and some were slightly famous in the music industry. The worst one seemed to be Wen Yuan. She had achieved nothing and stayed at home. Moreover, she had divorced a famous person. Very few students knew that she had married Yimu Bai, the CEO of Stars Entertainment. Wen Yuan was besieged. It was a 10-year class reunion. Wen Yuan instinctively wanted to refuse because she didn't know if Yimu Bai wanted her to participate, so she said she might not be free. A female classmate looked at Wen Yuan and cleared her throat. Wen Yuan's bag isn't bad. It's a Hermes Platinum bag, right? But I heard that there are some imitations these days that are really good. What's the source? Can you tell us? Of course, we won't carry fake ones. But it's inevitable that our relatives will like it. It's good to give one to them to satisfy their vanity. Wen Yuan looked at Teacher Kong. Teacher Kong was also very helpless. Just as she was about to say something, Wen Yuan told her not to say it. She didn't care about this. The female classmate continued to speak harshly. By the way, we're all bringing family members to this gathering. Wen Yuan, has he remarried in the past few years? It's understandable that he found a wife so well the first time around. If he hasn't, he can still be single. I'm married, Wen Yuan said calmly and smiled. Chapter 3961. The female classmate was surprised. You're married? We've never heard of it. By the way, where are you working now? The man you found isn't good enough, right? You've put aside your professional knowledge for so many years. It must be hard and poor for you to do something else. Wen Yuan smiled. It's all right. She had been indifferent the whole time, and the women who took turns to talk were pretty boring. Thus, she put on a fake smile and put on a plump face. I'll definitely participate when the time comes. If life is too difficult, there's still us classmates. We can all take care of each other. Wen Yuan still smiled faintly and watched those girls leave. After they left, Teacher Kong sighed. They are still thinking about the time when you were in the limelight in school. The children who used to be so simple and straightforward had now become like this. It was really heartbreaking. Teacher Kong looked at Wen Yuan. Don't go if you don't want to. Don't force yourself. Wen Yuan smiled. Teacher, I'm fine. I'm fine. If I go, I'll go. Otherwise, I'll seem too petty. Teacher Kong was annoyed and amused at the same time. He also felt sorry for her. You're too easy to talk to. You've been bullied to this extent. Why don't you defend yourself? Because it's not someone I care about. Wen Yuan smiled faintly and supported Mrs. Kong. Let me give you a massage. Your waist will hurt again if you keep sitting. Mrs. Kong didn't refuse. She truly loved Wen Yuan as her own daughter. So, she wouldn't refuse Wen Yuan's kindness. Besides, only Wen Yuan looked at her sincerely. The two of them chatted. Kong Qiao and Yimu Bai were smoking in the corridor. Kong Qiao's gaze was especially deep. After a long time, he whispered, Yimu Bai, you win. He paused for a moment and then said, actually, I can never be with her. From the day I went abroad, or the day I was born, I was destined to never be with Wen Yuan. Yimubai is a truly beautiful person. She hasn't seen any darkness. Treat her well. Yimubai smiled faintly. Kong Qiao, do you know what you're like? Kong Qiao stared at him. Yimubai's voice was low. It's like having the appearance of an angel and the heart of a devil. Kong Qiao was stunned. You're really thorough. Then why did you give Su Mo a chance to get close to me? Don't say it was a coincidence. I didn't choose the place that day. It was an impromptu decision. Because Su Mo is the opposite of you. She has the toughest appearance and the softest heart. Kong Qiao, let her save you. Otherwise, you won't be clean for the rest of your life. Yimubai said. Concho, on the other hand, was still standing on the armrest, quietly smoking. Kong Qiao. He smiled. He laughed. He. That he. He she he who he. He. And he. He. Him. He she. He. Kong. He the he. He put out his cigarette and was about to turn around and leave when he saw a thin figure wearing a mask. If he was not mistaken, that person was Su Mo. Kong Qiao pursed his lips. When he came back to himself, he had already gone downstairs. He grabbed her hand before she left. Why did you come to the hospital? He had a bad idea. He hooked the medical file bag in her hand and opened it. Then his face turned pale. She was checked for HIV in the hospital. Chapter 3962. Kong Qiao's face darkened. Su Mo, I don't have AIDS. Su Mo snatched the thing from his hand and said in a nasal voice, who knows? Mr. Kong, you're such a mess. Kong Qiao's face darkened even more. Su Mo, this isn't your first time either. It's better than you, and I'm not selling it. Facing him, she was completely different from before. She was especially direct and rude, just like how she usually was. She had a clear distinction between love and hate. Clearly, when she saw Kong Qiao in the past, she would deliberately pretend to be like this, but there was no need to do so now. He was a scum. Kong Qiao sneered. Yes, Manager Su won't sell it. Manager Su will only be infatuated with the men she likes. He pulled her to his side, almost sticking to his chest. It was very intimate, but only she knew how rude and barbaric he was at this moment. He was a bastard. Su Mo struggled with all her might, but to no avail. Instead, she was dragged into his arms. Didn't you suspect that I have HIV? Why weren't you afraid when you seduced me in bed with me, huh? He was terrifyingly domineering. Su Mo saw a trace of malice in his eyes, and she was stunned. At that moment, she seemed to have seen the real Kong Qiao. Su Mo slowly gave up struggling. She looked at him, her pupils dilated, and murmured, "You hate yourself like this, don't you?" Kong Qiao's face darkened. He remembered what Yimubai had said, that Su Mo was suitable to save him. What was there to save? In this kind of Vanity Fair, he was in his element. He was not a man who would casually go to bed with others. There were many women who were holding a lot of money and kneeling down to lick his boots. He was not interested in them. What he pursued was a stable cooperative relationship. If necessary, he would consider having a one-night stand with the other party. This was Kong Qiao. Ordinary people had to go through this path to survive in this circle, but he did not need to do so. He had long been successful, and now there were a lot of people begging him to play a song. Even if it was a mess, it would still be regarded as a classic. Kong Qiao felt like he was living a rotten life, so he yearned for Wen Yuan's purity. Her piano playing was beautiful, just like in the past. At this moment, his feelings were exposed, and he was embarrassed into anger. And this list was simply a humiliation to him. He folded Su Mo in his arms and said in a cold and hard voice, "Miss Su, remember this in the future. Before you have sex with a man, you must first ask him to submit an HIV report to you. The last one must be within half a year." He was full of mockery and then threw her away. Su Mo almost fell to the ground. She glared at him with red eyes and said hoarsely, "Kong Qiao, you can't lie to yourself. You're just a walking corpse. I'm also warning you, don't even think about hitting Wen Yuan's principles. A whore like you isn't worthy. Male whore." Kong Qiao wanted to strangle the woman in front of her, but Su Mo did not back down. Her eyes were burning with flames. That flame was called, "Male whore, go to hell." Kong Qiao glared at her. "We'll never meet again. Do you think I want to see you?" Her voice was cold, but it was choked with a bit of anger. After that, Su Mo ran away. Kong Qiao looked at her back and pinched her fingers. Damn it. Male whore. By the time he returned to the ward, Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai had already left. At this moment, Yi Mubai had just started the car, and Wen Yuan saw that the car beside him seemed to be Su Mo's car. Chapter 3963. Yi Mubai followed Wen Yuan's gaze and looked over. It was Su Mo. She was sitting there rubbing her nose and dressed like a celebrity to prevent people from secretly taking pictures. He opened the car door for Wen Yuan and she immediately got out. Yi Mubai wasn't a person who liked to join in the fun, but he also got out. When Su Mo saw them, she was a little confused. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence. "CEO Yi, why are you in the hospital?" "I'm here to see Kong Qiao's mother." Wen Yuan looked at her red nose. "Is your cold serious? I heard from Secretary He that you asked for leave." At this time, Wen Yuan was looking at a report. She was close to Su Mo, so she didn't think much about it and directly took it to read. As she opened it, she said, "Hospital reports are so high-end now." As soon as she opened it, she saw the 3 letters HIV. No matter how ignorant Wen Yuan was, she knew what it was. Her eyes slowly turned to Yi Mubai and then to Su Mo. Su Mo felt uncomfortable, but she was afraid that they would misunderstand, so she had to tell the truth. "It's like this. One night, I accidentally got drunk and had sex with a man. Of course, I have to be careful with a man I don't know. It's better to be prepared." As soon as she finished speaking, Wen Yuan smashed the report on her head. "How dare you have a one-night stand?" Yi Mubai picked it up from the side. He thought that Su Mo didn't have any dinner parties recently. If there was a chance for a one-night stand after getting drunk, it should be Kong Qiao. Why did Kong Qiao show her teeth at Su Mo? Otherwise, why would Su Mo check this? He found it funny and returned the report to Su Mo. Then, he pulled Mrs. Yi back and coaxed, "Su Mo is an adult. It's not a big deal to have a private life. You've been single for so long. Do you have a private life too?" Wen Yuan asked directly. Yi Mubai touched his nose. "You guys talk." His behavior was like a reality. He did. When Yuan was angry, but he couldn't just ignore Su Mo. First, he fiercely taught Su Mo a lesson, but it wasn't enough. After that, he refused to leave. Su Mo glanced at Yimubai for help, but when Yuan got angry again. What's the use of looking at him? I'll check him later. Su Mo couldn't help but laugh. When Yuan wanted to fight with her, but in the end, he was dragged away by Yimubai. Alright. Su Mo is already an adult. She's already 30 years old. It's fine if she doesn't say a word after being pointed at and scolded by you like a primary school student. She has a guilty conscience. When Yuan sat in the car and even threatened Su Mo, who was in the car next to him. The way he bared his fangs and brandished his claws made Su Mo immediately drive the car away. When Yuan was furious. Look at her. Why doesn't she find a man to date? Why does she have to have a one-sided relationship? No, I have to introduce Kong Chao to her. Yimubai reached out and stroked his smooth chin. You don't mind. What if Kong Chao is as pure as ice and pure as jade? Won't she feel that he's at a disadvantage? When Yuan looked at him and said very slowly, it can't be. Kong Chao is more than 30 years old. It's impossible for him to be like that. Yimubai found it funny, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He directly started the car, and when Yuan's fiery eyes fell on his face. After a long time, he said fiercely, Yimubai, don't you want to explain your dark history? Of course, he wouldn't admit it. He pretended to be dead. What dark history? Chapter 3964. When Yuan knew nothing about it. MMP2 When Yuan was quite angry. He sat up straight and ignored him, refusing to go to the company with him. In the end, he coaxed and pestered her to go to the company. Yimubai's dark history was actually quite simple and crude. It happened during the period when he lost his memory. There were some consensual affairs, but smart men would never mention it again, let alone admit it. So no matter how angry Wen Yuan was, he always had a way to coax her. Anyway, he would not admit it. When Yuan was angry and ignored him during the lunch break, locking him outside the lounge. She called Bai Shuali and told her about Yimubai's dark history. How could Bai Shuali know about it? Only Yimubai himself knew about it, but normal men wouldn't say it. When Yuan, don't think about the past anymore. Bai Shuali lay on the bed and shook her feet. The important thing is the future, the future. When Yuan sighed deeply. I'm angry just thinking about it. Give him the cold shoulder for a few days. Bai Shuali said, he must be very uncomfortable. He's used to eating fish and meat every day. If you let him not have grass to eat every day, he'll be very uncomfortable. When Yuan. She wasn't fat at all. How was she eating fish and meat? Anyway, she felt much better after hanging up the phone. She lay down for a while and then went out to tell Yimubai that she was going shopping. He was talking to Secretary He and frowned. I'll go with you after I'm done with work. She reached out to him. I don't have money. He looked at her and finally took out a card from his wallet and put it in her palm. Ask the driver to send you, and, he coughed lightly. Buy me some shirts and ties. When Yuan snorted. People with dark history don't have the right to buy things. Yimubai didn't care that Secretary He was there. He sneered. Mrs. Yi, you don't just have a dark history. You have a marriage history. Yimubai. When Yuan was furious. She swore to destroy his card, so she called Bai Shuali along. When the two women saw each other, they started to complain about their husbands. Wen Yuan didn't think there was anything to complain about Yi Mulin, but she thought of something. She hesitated for a long time before asking, "Did Mulin really abuse your family in the past?" Bai Shuali's face fell. She held her chin and sighed. "It's not that serious. He's just a pervert who likes to use violence." She complained in a soft voice, "You don't even know how inexperienced he is, nor is he gentle. He just does whatever he wants. Anyway, I hated him to death when we first got married." Wen Yuan received an incredible piece of information, which was that Yi Mulin was still a virgin on his wedding night. Thinking about it, a serious elite, in order to hide his virginity, he became very rough. And so, Wen Yuan was cured, and he was very satisfied. She and Bai Shuali went shopping together and spent a few million yuan in one afternoon. Yi Mubai received messages from the bank from time to time. When he saw the amount spent in a men's clothing store, he smiled happily. When he got off work, he called Wen Yuan. "Mrs. Yi, do you need Mr. Yi to pick you up?" Wen Yuan snorted. "No, I have a driver." He stretched out his hands to pull his tie. "Well, see you later." He lowered his voice. "Don't eat outside, do you hear me?" Her answer was to hang up. He looked at his phone and said to himself, "It seems that I spoiled her." Secretary, he held back his laughter. "But is Mrs. Yi cute like this?" "Cute?" Yi Mubai said with a smile. He took his coat and car keys and walked out. "That's all for today." Secretary, tomorrow I won't come in the morning. End of this chapter. Chapter 3965. Yi Mubai drove to the villa. Xiangnan and Yi Hui had already gone back. Wen Yuan came back 10 minutes later. The trunk was full of things. They were all the trophies she had bought today. Yi Mubai helped her pack up. Some of them were Xiangnan and Yi Hui's. He asked Xiangnan to help his sister move them back to the room and slowly dismantle them. He moved their own things back to the bedroom. There were so many things, so he moved them all at once. Wen Yuan followed him and watched him take out a box and open it. It was a pair of crystal cufflinks. He took it off and buckled it on his sleeve. "It's not bad." He looked at the shirt and tie again. Then he smiled and pulled Wen Yuan onto his lap. His voice was a little hoarse. "I like it when you take care of these for me." Wen Yuan didn't say anything. She just leaned on his shoulder. He knew that she still cared about what had happened before. Although he didn't say it, she could guess. His thin lips were close to her ear. "I won't betray our marriage, okay?" Wen Yuan didn't say anything. In fact, she also knew that she couldn't afford to be calculative. This matter passed just like that. She didn't mention it again, nor did she throw a tantrum. She ate calmly and took care of the children. Xiangnan and Yi Hui were very happy because there were many gifts that they had wanted but hadn't bought. The two children were very happy, so Wen Yuan let them play by themselves. She went back to the master bedroom. Yi Mubai had already taken a shower. He was wearing a bathrobe and leaning against the headboard. The bedside lamp was on, but the main one was not. This was a signal that he wanted to do it. Wen Yuan suddenly felt a little nervous. They had to do it every day, but this kind of hint still made her a little ashamed. When she came in, he looked up. "The two children are still playing." She nodded. "They're quite happy." Then she took her pajamas to take a shower. When she came back and climbed onto the bed, he put down the magazine and put her in his arms. He didn't lie down, but hugged her from behind. He bit her neck from behind and said in a hoarse voice, "Are you not angry anymore?" She felt a little uncomfortable being bitten by him, but she still endured it. She grabbed her pajamas tightly with one hand and placed the other on his leg. Her body stiffened, and he chuckled. Can't stand it. Actually, he didn't do much. He just kissed her a few times and she became like this. He wasn't in a hurry, and continued to tease her. After a while, he finally reached his hand out. Then, he was somewhat surprised, and his voice was even dripping. You're not wearing anything underneath? When Yuan turned his head in his arms and kissed his chin. He kissed it lightly and then moved to kiss the corner of his mouth. His voice was intermittent. Anyway, I'll have to take it off later. He chuckled and kissed and hugged her just like that. He wasn't a man who liked to do things directly. He would always tease her for a long time until her skin was as red as a cooked shrimp and she begged him. Only then would he be willing to give it to her. Today was no exception. After one round, it was already an hour later. He did not enjoy it much. He put on his pajamas and went to check on Xiang Nan and Yi Hui. After making sure that they were asleep, he came back to continue making love to her. When Yuan took very good care of herself. He loved her body very much and had a strong interest in it. He did have other women before. It was a ridiculous period of time, but after he married Wen Yuan, he had never thought of having sex with other women. He had no desire to explore other women's bodies at all. He only wanted her. In the end, Wen Yuan still couldn't take it anymore and begged him to end it. Yi Mubai seriously wanted to continue, but he also knew that he had been quite indulgent recently, and Wen Yuan would occasionally be hurt by him. He calmed down and whispered in her ear, "Did I hurt you?" Wen Yuan pressed her face flat against his chest. "No, I'm just a little tired." She and he had a good relationship recently. She didn't want to argue with him for too long because of the past, but she still wanted to talk to him. Mubai, she propped herself up. "I don't want to go to your company all the time. I'd rather stay at home when I'm free. I can do some housework. If I go all the time, I'll feel like an accessory to you. There's no need to go all the time." He closed his eyes, thought for a moment, and opened them again. "You really don't want to go?" She nodded. "I actually still want to work." Yi Mubai stared at her face and didn't say anything. He just reached out and gently touched her face. "Isn't it good to stay at home? Wen Yuan, I don't want you to work so hard. Look at Sumo. She often vomits because she wants to do one more business. I want to teach." She looked at him. "I used to teach too. Work is very simple, and I don't need to go out to drink. Mubai, you can't always lock me up." After she said this, he looked at her with a somewhat deep gaze. Wen Yuan knew that her words had touched him. She bit her lip and looked at him. Her voice became even lower. "Please." "Okay." Even an A-list actress wouldn't have such a price, right? Yi Mubai sneered, "This is the price for a month." Wen Yuan, the two of them messed around for a long time. She suddenly thought of something. There will be a class reunion in a few days. They said that they will bring a partner. "Will you go?" she said while playing with the beard on his chin. In fact, she didn't have much hope. Yi Mubai didn't care much about these things between women. Besides, his identity was not suitable. He lowered his head and looked at her. "Do you want me to go?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.